Pastor Dalrock writes an article entitled St. Jerome the Puritan. And so he did an expose on how St. Jerome was similar to the Puritans. And it was really, really good stuff, really interesting. And what he says is, and we're going to have to flesh this out, but what he says is he's linking that both the Puritans and St. Jerome viewed sex as something dirty. Just the exception was the Puritans believed that that sex could be purified by romantic love. Here we go. Well, Pastor Dalrock writes about the book The Worldly Saints by Leland Ryken, and Ryken explains that the Puritans believed married sex was dirty unless consecrated by romantic love. Here's what Ryken writes. He says, if the main purpose of married sex is the expression of mutual love and companionship, it is a perversion of sex to reduce it to merely a physical act. He says, how can two become one flesh lawfully when as there wanteth the union and conjugation of the heart, the true and natural mother of all marriage duties? He says, Perkins had something similar in mind when he wrote, nothing is more shameless than to love a wife as though she were a strumpet. Okay, so and then he says, John Milton wrote, who was a Puritan, although copulation be considered among the ends of marriage, yet the act thereof in a right esteem can no longer be matrimonial than it is an effect of conjugal love. When love vanishes, meaning romantic love, romantic feelings, then the fleshly act indeed may continue, but not holy, not pure, not beseeming the sacred bond of marriage, being at best an animal excretion. So Ryken writes about this in his book. And Pastor Dalrock writes, when he quotes Perkins on this, who is a Puritan as well, he says that he's actually quoting St. Jerome in this. Now, I did another video on Jerome, and he had some crazy views on marriage and sex within marriage. But here's what St. Jerome wrote a long time ago. Again, St. Jerome lived, I think, in around 400 A.D. He translated the Vulgate, which was the Latin translation of the Scripture. So he did a pretty awesome contribution to church history. Just his thoughts on love and marriage were not very good. Let's go. So here's what Jerome says. She says that there is nothing blacker than to love a wife as if she were an adulteress. So Jerome thought you should not love your wife with romantic love. He thought romantic love was very bad, that you shouldn't be, doing this. He even says it is good for a man not to touch a woman. And he's basing that on 1 Corinthians 7:1. Says it's good for a man not to touch a woman. St. Jerome says if it is good not to touch a woman, then it is bad to touch one. That was his way of thinking. For there is no opposite to goodness but badness. If it be bad and the evil is pardoned, the reason for the concession is to prevent worse evil, is what St. Jerome thought the Apostle Paul was meaning when he wrote that in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. And so Pastor Dalrock, he's writing about this because Ryken in his book, he says that he's right in general, that the Puritans falsely believed that romantic love was required to sanctify married sex. And he says, after all, the quote from Milton is correct, even though he's saying the author of this book, Ryken, failed to note that Milton made the argument in an essay arguing for the adoption of no-fault divorce. And so he says that Jerome and the Puritans viewed married sex as something dirty. And here's the reason why. This is probably the most interesting thing about this article. He says the only difference is the Puritans decided that married sex could be made clean or sanctified through feelings of romantic love, which is an idea that doesn't come from the Bible. And Jerome, on the other hand, he didn't think anything could make married sex clean and sanctified from the way he interpreted Scripture. All right. This is interesting stuff. This is interesting stuff. But I thought that was the most profound thing, that the Puritans and Jerome being with his crazy view. I'll put a link to my video I did on Jerome and his views. But both of them view sex in marriage as something dirty. Just the Puritans said, well, but if it's sanctified by romantic love, then it's pure and sanctified. Man, we got to get this stuff corrected. We got to get it corrected. But even with all that, Christ is winning. He is building his church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Until next time, this is the PostMillennial Man.